Well, thank you for being here on a very pleasant New Mexico Albuquerque Saturday morning when you could be doing other things. So I appreciate your attendance. Our topic is how to get through a storyline, and I'll begin with telling you a story myself. I give talks to a lot of writers groups around the country. In September, I'll be in Denver, for example, giving a talk. And I used to speak, you all used to have your own conference, the Southwest Writers National Conference, and you'd have 400 and 500 people. It used to be 20 years ago. And it seems as if almost every state has a writers conference, and at many of them, wouldn't hurt for you to be aware of this, at the bigger ones, there are agents who are more than happy to have you pitch to them. It is usually part of the draw that they offer for you to travel there and pay your attendance fees. And these agents are, by and large, terrific. When I was starting, none of this was available. There were no writers' conferences, and I had to learn in a difficult way. And when I look at all the opportunities that are available to you, wow, in a way there's never been a better time for writers. So if you say to yourself, gee, I don't know how to get an agent, or it's very difficult, or gosh, all the submissions, and will I get buried, will they ignore me? Truly, most of these larger conferences have an afternoon set aside for you to pitch. So it's not an opportunity I think you should waste. Now, as I go around to these events, I tend to notice the same people. And I was at one in Hawaii, mind you, and this person had traveled to Hawaii to study yet again about writing, and I recognized her. I'd spoken to her on many occasions. So I took her aside and I said, how long have you been going to these conferences? What's going on here? And she said, oh, I just don't think I'm ready yet. And I thought to myself, how hard is it to learn not to have a flashback on the first page? I mean, there are certain basic rules that are repeated again and again and again in how to write workshops. So in a moment of understanding, I thought, I asked her, well, what do you hope to accomplish with your work? What? And I said, you know, what sort of theme are you trying to communicate? What's your goal in wanting to be a writer? What? And often I think that might be the problem in terms of having a through line in a story. I have an acquaintance, I haven't seen him in years, but I heard about this. Wants to be a writer, and he lots of distractions in life, and he said, I'm going to set aside a weekend to do nothing but write. You see where this is going. So he set it all aside, and there he got it all, you know, and he sat, and he sat, and then he went to the couch and spent the rest of the weekend cursing himself for having no talent. I don't see how you can write a story if when you start you don't have a goal that you intend to accomplish. And that in turn leads me, when I speak to people in this situation, to say, why do you want to be a writer? And I love to, my writing book was mentioned. I brought a small box. If you want later, I'll sign them for you. But in them, I tell the story of Jerry Lewis, nobody talks about Jerry Lewis anymore, but at one time, especially in France, he was a big deal. And he taught a course in comedy writing and comedy performance at UCLA. And so how do you get into a course for comedy with Jerry Lewis? Well, he gave you a question and you had to answer it. Why do you want to be a comedian? And there was only one answer that he would accept, and the answer was, because I absolutely need to be. Well, okay, I dare say most of you wouldn't be here without that, but that's only the first of the series of questions. The next one is, why do you need to be? And people tend to separate at this point with those who have a story that they absolutely need to express, and those who want to be writers because they hope to be rich and famous. And these days, folks, the second option is not really a realistic one. And in a little while, I'm going to tell you about it. You wouldn't get this from anybody unless you were sitting with some very experienced editors, agents, and authors. If you wish to be rich and famous, that means you're chasing the market. And I promise you, you will never get ahead of that. You'll always be chasing the market's backside. Usually, the desire for fame and fortune is a matter of personal insecurity, a personal lack of fulfillment. And the bestseller would say, well, then I'd know I was important, then I would know people love me. And if you're going to go in that direction, I cannot help you. And I don't mean that in a dismissive way, because that was never my story. I didn't set out. I've been very fortunate. I've had a career that is just astonishing, and it's lasted so for 48 years. My first novel, First Blood, was published in 1972. Now, when I was working on First Blood, which is different in many ways from the movie, and yet very similar, when I was working on it, I had a goal to find a new way to write action. I was at the Penn State University in graduate school, and my master's thesis was on the style of Ernest Hemingway. I do not write like Ernest Hemingway, but Hemingway has principles that I found to be very helpful. And if you read, in many ways you can consider him an action novelist. If you look at his war novels, The Farewell to Arms, For Whom the Bell Tolls, his gangster novel, To Have and Have Not, a lot of his short stories, there's a lot of action in his work. And when you read his action, it's as if no one else had ever written it before. It was so fresh. And I compared that to, and this just drives me crazy, and whenever I find it in a book, and lately it's a lot, shots rang out. Shots do not ring out. So the statement itself is nonsense, but beyond that, it's an unforgivable cliche. Gunsmoke filled the air. Folks, in modern ammunition, there is no gunsmoke. And I think about authors today writing this trash action style, and what I was trying to do in 72. And it took me 3 years to write First Blood. And my goal was essentially a technical one. How can I write action in a way that's never been done before? At a time when I was blessed to have a teacher at Penn State who was a professional author. Imagine, this is unbelievable, that a university would have a professional writer who'd earned a living writing who was teaching writing. What a thought. And he'd been a very successful science fiction writer in the 50s, and now was teaching at Penn State. And he was helping me, teaching me how to manage to do the impossible, because through him I was able to speak to his agent, who said there is no market for an action book today. You might be able to get it in paperback, but you'll never get it in hardback. So I had already been discouraged about this particular project. But it didn't matter to me, because I had the voice speaking to me. I was once on an airplane and somebody, I don't say I'm an author to most people anymore. I say I'm a retired literature professor because nobody wants to talk. And she said, "You're an author." This is in the days when I was foolish. And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, what's that like?" And I said, "Well, it's really fascinating because sometimes, you know, the characters take on a life of their own and they talk to you." And she said, "You hear voices." And it turned out she was a behavioral psychologist. And, you know, on the airplane, right, she's going like this. In any case, I was basically told not to do it, but I persisted because I had the urge. Skip forward. In 2009, my granddaughter Natalie, age 14, died from a rare bone cancer called Ewing sarcoma. How rare is it? Only 200 people get it in the United States each year. In 1987, my son Matthew, age 15, died from the same disease. Not many, there is no literature to suggest that this disease is inherited, that it is passed down through a genetic sequence. The theory is that we just had bad luck. Cosmic bad luck. So in 2009, my daughter, as were we, because for us it was grief twice observed, we were looking for some whatever answer. And our daughter had found a movie called Creation, a 2009 movie about Charles Darwin's nervous breakdown when his favorite daughter Annie died. And Darwin at the time was working on Origin of Species. And there was a lot of problems because his daughter had died because he had suggested something called hydropathy, basically water therapy for her. But it may have been that the hydropathy killed her, so he had some guilt. Meanwhile, his wife, who was a devout Christian, said, "You know, if people read your book, they could become atheists. So maybe God killed Annie to stop you from writing the book." So he had a lot of burdens, and he had a nervous breakdown, and everything that could go wrong with his body did. But there were so many things wrong that nobody could figure out what was wrong with him, what was the core. Well, we know now, thanks to Freud. And in the movie, as he struggles through this, a character, one of those thankless characters in stories that we should never allow to happen, came on for only one purpose, to deliver this little message, which was, "You know, Charles, there are people like Thomas de Quincey who believe that we can be controlled by thoughts and emotions we do not know we have." Well, this is Freudianism, but this movie takes place in the 1850s. Some of you are looking at me curiously, that we can be controlled by thoughts and emotions we do not know we have. And the character says, De Quincey's been saying this, and I thought, who the hell is De Quincey? This is a book, this is a movie set in the 1850s, a half century before Freud. So is this guy invented? Well, he wasn't, and it turned out that Thomas de Quincey invented the subconscious, and then Freud lifted from him. So in my grief, I seized on this and said, because after all, what is grief but in a large part about the thoughts and emotions that we do not know we have or that we are struggling to understand? And I began a 6-year odyssey into the mid-Victorian world. At a time when people were saying to me, hey, you're the creator of Rambo, so you wrote all these outdoor action books, and then you wrote all these spy novels. The Brotherhood of the Rose was mentioned earlier, made a difference in the spy genre, because it was the first to blend the UK and US spy novel traditions. And now you want to write, let me understand this, the creator of Rambo is going to write some Victorian mysteries? What the hell is wrong with you? Which has sort of been the story of my career. And I said, you know, it isn't wise, but that's where I'm going. And I won't deny it. So literally for 2 years, all I did was read about Thomas de Quincey. I read all of his work several times. I read everything I could about the Victorian period. Until, with the 3 books, Murder is a Fine Art, Inspector of the Dead, and Ruler of the Night, I, in effect, had de Quincey speaking, as I remembered, his dialogue from his work. So whatever he said in the books was him, truly. And then I made friends with 2 Thomas de Quincey biographers, and so I was sending them the manuscript and saying, you know, tell me where I'm wrong, because I want all the backstory to be accurate. And I had this wonderful escape from grief into 1854, 1855 London. I have a map of the period, and I can get around on that map as if I lived there. So my recommendation to you, Frank Sinatra used to have a sign outside his door that said, you better have a damn good reason for ringing this bell. And I guess what I would say to you is you better have a damn good reason for writing a book. When I start in the writing book I talk about 3 things that I must satisfy before I start a book. One is that the theme, that the point of it, doesn't have to be highly political, which I'm not. I don't write politics. It doesn't have to be highly philosophical, but there has to be something that I am desperate to communicate. And in the case of the Victorian books, here's a kind of condensed quotation from de Quincey. The human mind is composed of chasms and sunless abysses, layer upon layer, in which there are secret chambers where alien natures hide undetected. That became my purpose in the 3 novels. And every time I had a plot problem, I went back to the first principle. What am I trying to communicate? It seems to me that if you can identify what it is you're trying to do, the rest of it is pretty matter of fact. For the record, I don't know what, sometimes writers don't talk enough to other people or people with different experiences, but only twice in my lifetime have I been so struck that I have been able to sit down in one sitting, not knowing how I'm starting or where I'm going, and write a short story or a chapter, which when I was done, I never had to touch again. I only did it twice. One of them is a short story called The Dripping. Some of you know my work, and it's in a collection called Black Evening, which turned out to be my first sale. And the other is, if you know my novel First Blood, it's the Batcave sequence. That was written in 3 hours in an afternoon, and I never touched it again. So when what I suggest, a lot of our problems come when we're talking to one another, and I speak to my wife about what I'm up to, but you know, that all goes into the air. You know, it's gone. And you go to your writers' groups and you talk about what it is you wish to do, and that's all very interesting. It may be helpful. On the other hand, you may be losing the energy that makes you want to write it in the first place because you talk it out. You don't want to be antisocial, but I very seldom talk about. I have a group of writers in Santa Fe that I'm with. We meet once a month to watch Westerns. We've been doing it for 11 years. We get two Westerns a night, with hundreds and hundreds of Westerns. In fact, that's what I'm working on now. That's my interest. There is no market for a Western, but I've been working on a Western for the past 2 years. Because I want to. Because it's important to me. Because I might get lucky. In my writing book, I suggest an alternative to the conversations. I suggest that you write a letter to yourself, in which, if you have an idea, you sit down with yourself. Life for me is binary, and I often talk to myself, and it is, unlike what my seatmate on the airplane thinks, it can be very helpful. And I'm going to give you an example. Some years ago, I happened to be looking through Architectural Digest, and I saw photographs of a house that had been owned by a silent movie star called Ramon Navarro. And the house was built for him by the son of Frank Lloyd Wright. And it's an amazing, it looks like a Mayan temple. And it was in the Hollywood Hills at a time when there was nothing there, and at a time when the desert quality of the region was pretty obvious. And there's his house. And then we see Ramon by the swimming pool, and we see his interesting dining room, which had black beads hanging, covering the walls, so as you move, the black beads would click together. It drive me nuts. And I couldn't get enough of looking at those photographs. I bought the magazine. I kept coming back to it. Now, when this happens to me, I know something's at work. So why was I so fascinated by this piece? And because this is way before my fascination with Thomas de Quincey and the concept of the subconscious, but clearly something was going on here. And it finally came to me that I didn't much care. Could have been another subject, but Navarro is long dead. And his career, which went like this, as a producer in Hollywood once said, "Just remember, David, nobody lasts forever." And the house in real life, because I went to see it, is covered now on each side, not covered, but there's shrubbery, there's trees, there's bushes. It's the difference in time is considerable. And I finally realized what was going on, that I associated photographs with death. Because if you think about it, the photographs that work on us are, oh, there's Uncle Joe. God, look at how young he looks. It's a shame the cancer took him. Or, gee, look at what our house looked like back then. You know, I remember it was painted such and such. Photographs freeze time. And I find that very weird and eerie and in its way scary. Photographs remind me of my mortality. And I set out to write a book on that theme. because obviously it was working on me. The book was eventually called Double Image, and it was about a professional photographer who finds photographs from 1933 and becomes obsessed with them for the reasons in part that I just gave to you. So I had my theme, and I was working and analyzing it in my letter to myself, because this didn't come to me all at once. It came to me because I went to my computer and I said, "Good morning, David." And my computer replied, "Hi, David, how are you?" And I said, "I've got an idea for a story." And my alter ego said, "Well, tell me about the story." And I said, "Well, I just don't know enough about it. It's these photographs." "Okay, tell me about the photographs." And in this back and forth, question and answer, one part of me talking to another part of me, which again could show that I'm certifiable. After 20 single-spaced pages, in effect I was being my own psychoanalyst, I began to get a sense of what it was I wanted to write. Well, it seemed very clear to me, now you're in the decision-making mode. How do you communicate a story about photographs, especially old photographs? So you're going to make it a curator, you're going to have somebody in a photography store. Pretty obviously, if you think about it well enough, the main character is going to be a photographer. But most photographers don't have a life of excitement unless you're a war photographer. So my next decision was that he would be a war photographer. So where was the war going to be? Well, at the time in 1995, the hot spot was Bosnia. So Bosnia it was. So now I started doing research on Bosnia. And then I thought, I get it. He's going to witness a war atrocity. It's going to threaten his life because the bad guys know he took photographs. He's going to escape. But oh my God, what he saw and the fright he had as he tried to escape will be that he's had enough of that and he's going to go to, excuse the expression, straight and become an art photographer. And that's when the trouble starts. So in a way, this novel plotted itself because I knew what it was I wanted to accomplish. And because what I wanted to accomplish was something that was seriously important to me. So to go back to my 3 requirements, one was that the theme had to be important to me, personally. I'm not much interested in politics because if you write a political novel today, 10 years from now, 5 years from now, it's going to be so old-fashioned, who cares? First Blood has never been out of print in 48 years. I don't mention that for the applause. I mention it because using Hemingway as my model, Hemingway said you write for today and tomorrow, and then he said, and with luck, 10 years and 20 years and more thereafter. So when you're writing, what's this going to read like? How possible is it to imagine what's this going to feel like 10 years from now or whatever? So that I don't know if I mentioned Vietnam twice in the novel. You can read that novel today, and of course there's no cell phones and things, but it could feel like it's happening now. And so that became my goal that it was personal, and then moving into the second, because I'm already talking about it, to write the book in a way that maybe hadn't been done before, or that had a freshness to it. I don't know if you've noticed, if you read thrillers these days, they're sort of looking alike. It's as if they're written by the same person. And there's a reason for that, which I'm going to get to, and I better get to it quick. So I try to write a book in a way that is new so that somebody else writing would have to read it and take it into account when they wrote their book. And then the third is the research. if I don't learn something from writing a book, I don't want to have anything to do with it. Ideally, when I come out the other side, I will be a fuller, bigger person for it. But in terms of our topic, the through line, nobody remembers Alan J. Lerner anymore, and nobody remembers the great musical Camelot. But the example is nonetheless good. Some of you do. You would be surprised the places I go and they say that old guy up there, the stuff he remembers. Really, this is exciting. Alan J. Lerner and Fritz Loeb, they were the guys. So, Lerner knew what he was doing, and when he was writing Camelot, the script, he had a note on the wall above his typewriter in those days, which said, Camelot, how our dreams exceed our abilities. And everything he wrote was relevant to that. So that is my theme. How do I begin a novel which doesn't have people sipping coffee, and doesn't have people driving to work meditating, and doesn't have two people sitting, in a living room, but has movement? How do I begin a book in which stuff happens? And I mentioned earlier about the binary quality of my mind. Everything is choices. And once you know what it is you want to accomplish, you can. James M. Cain, who wrote The Postman Always Rings Twice, which is my idea of the perfect, pure novel. There aren't even any speech tags in it. Oh my God, it's a beautiful book. They threw me off the hay truck around noon. I gotta read the second sentence. And Cain had a theory of what he called the algebra of storytelling. A plus B plus C plus D plus E equals. So if you know what the equal is, it's not that difficult to go back and figure out the logical stream of circumstances. Whenever I finish a scene and I'm about to start the next scene, I say, all right, what's the purpose of the scene? Where am I going? Why is this here? What do I need to do? So I know what I want to accomplish as I write the scene, and then it's the same thing again and again and again. So I'm going to leap forward a little, but it's all to the point. There are massive changes happening in publishing. We're talking about Big Five, and you may have noticed recently that Simon & Schuster is on the block. Simon & Schuster was purchased by a media conglomerate not long ago. And then as these things happen, oh my God, we're in debt because we bought all this stuff. We got to sell some of it. And the one thing that they felt they could get rid of was a major publishing house because it didn't fit their media model. Well, why doesn't it fit their media model? This was hard for me to believe, but it's true. How many streaming services are there available? 5, 10, 50, 220.
And growing.
And growing, that's right, plus. How many scripted television series were there available a couple of months ago? 530. The head of AMC, when this was starting, said, nobody can watch that much TV. But people sure are trying. Now, I'm not going to embarrass any of you, but wherever I go these days, and I suggest you do the same thing, I say, what are you reading now? And the answer is, I'm too busy to read. And the next question is, I love to do this. What are you too busy doing? And the answer is, watching television. I have encountered some people who haven't read a book in a year. Now, the reason I said I don't want to embarrass any of you, because I could. Right? I could say, hey, ask yourself how much you're reading compared to what you're watching. And if you'll notice, I was talking about thrillers, it's starting to look a lot alike. And not only that, even the longer series always had a middle problem. And now the 10-episode ones and the 8-episode ones, they have the same middle problem. We have 2 good first episodes, 2 good last one, and then they tread water for the middle because they don't know what to do, mostly because they haven't been trained. If this persists, the further crisis in publishing is going to continue. I know of an editor who had been a youngish editor in 30s, like maybe 35, who had been to various houses and now was had a nice title and worked at a house for 4 or 5 years and quit recently, saying that the editor was tired of working 60 and 70-hour weeks because they've cut back on the editorial staffs in favor of the marketing staff. And this editor went to work in an independent bookstore. So, where's Steve Brewer? Is Steve here? Where is he? He's gone?
He went to work.
He left my talk. Well, but if he's gone to the bookstore, that's good. But see, this is against the trend. This is terrific, and we need more of that. And the reason we could maybe make it happen is that if you do what I'm doing and embarrass people into reading. Honestly, I don't, and then they think they'll get the better me. They'll say, well, what are you reading? And I say, I'm so glad you asked. And I trot out all the titles and why I love each of them. And of course, then they look chagrined, but I don't know if I persuaded them. I think we have not only an existential problem in terms of television versus books, but also in terms of the mentality of our culture. I'm sensing in the general population, you are all brilliant, but in the general population, don't you sense a sort of lesser language, a lesser relying on emotion more than intellect, that we're sort of heading down? So I have 2 author friends, big deal author friends. Forgive me for doing this, I just don't want to run, I want to get this done. I only have so much time and I want to make sure I cover what I came here to do. And now I forgot what it was I was going to say.
Author friends.
Author friends, thank you. Sometimes I pick an unhappy like you, I would say, now you remember what I'm saying. What was I saying? The author friends. All right. Each of them has written a really interesting, well-crafted book, which they sent to me because they were baffled because they could not get a major publisher to buy it. Well, once I read the books, it was pretty obvious why, because it did not fit basically the trend that we're experiencing at the moment, which is what's called domestic noir, or sometimes called psychological suspense. It's sort of crammed together. Gillian Flynn's Gone Girl was the origin for this, and basically it's a story dominated by female main characters, female first-person narrators, who tend to have various issues which make their first person unreliable, and that through various parts of the plot discover that the person who is their greatest enemy is the one who is closest to them. And the girl and the woman in the window, the girl on the train, you can go on. All you need is a female gender in the title and you get the idea. If it's my agent, tell her I'm busy. That is pretty much the only thing that's guaranteed to sell, except that when you talk to agents and editors, they hate the genre. And they say, oh, that's all done, but they keep selling it, they keep buying it, and they keep promoting it. The problem is that editors don't have the authority they used to have, and they now need to go to the marketing department before they can buy a book. So the marketing department says, yeah, maybe. And remember, these editors, if they have a bad enough streak in terms of sales, they get fired. I once had a friend of mine, it was kind of fun. I had a friend who ran 20th Century Fox for 1 year. When one guy got kicked out and the other guy was about to be hired, and so my friend was in the middle. And he knew he was squeezed in there, and he said, you know, the easiest thing in the world is to say no. They can't kick me out if I say no. It's saying yes, then you're putting yourself in a position. So what I'm sensing is that we have over here with streaming niche products. If you want a transvestite detective living in Vietnam, you will soon have one, I have no doubt. Because, you know, every crazy putting together of the variables, you can catch it. And I don't think this is a good business model, but it's nonetheless available. That's essentially what streaming is about. On the other hand, major publishers are going for the common denominator. But you know what? In the age of Facebook and Twitter and all that was unleashed through those two social media, there is no common denominator. We can't even agree on simple things like decency in public language. So I think the model that's over here with publishers and going for the common denominator is going to produce, I call it the contracting market. It's like in the Westerns where we get the wagons and get them together. That's what I see happening. And when I speak to editors and agents, candidly, they acknowledge this. An editor and I had an experiment a while ago. There's something called book scan where you can sort of tell how many copies are sold of a book. This is very imperfect. Amazon doesn't report. Some independent bookstores do not report. They figure 70% accurate, maybe. But nonetheless, it's something. And publishers rely on BookScan to decide whether or not to renew an author's contract and things like that. So the question was, what does it take to be number 12 on the New York Times bestseller hardback? And this, we chose an author. I'm not gonna, doesn't matter. This was a big deal author. And we discovered that that author, that week, or when the reporting came in, to be number 12 on the New York Times bestseller list, had sold 3,000 hardbacks. That wouldn't have even got you in the door 20 years ago. In the day when mass market paperbacks existed, it was not uncommon that you would have a printing of 500,000 copies. And you would probably sell 350,000 of those, and the publisher would be happy at the difference, because the spread, the pricing was right. By comparison, a fairly successful book, I'm not talking about the biggest names who still get, I have no idea what if you're in the top 10 you would sell, but if you get the New York Times, you will notice that they don't list anything past 10 anymore. So I have no reason to be sure of this, but it seemed to me that the sales were not strong enough to merit going past the 10. So I see a problem here. I see that the big 5 are going, which might be the big 4 soon because of the Simon & Schuster sale, I think that what could be happening is that we're going to have a further contraction, going more for the common denominator. One of these authors I mentioned, they're going to self-publish. Or go to small presses. I had last year I had a book of short stories called Before I Wake. My previous book collections, Black Evening and Nightscape, were mass market. But there is no mass market. So people we went to said there's no market for it, so we can't publish it. So I went to a company called Subterranean Press. They do a beautiful job. So we had 1,500 signed hardbacks, numbered, $40 each, and that's it. There's no more. But I have the rights. So I now sold the large print rights for libraries. I now sold the audio rights. That might be a new model, whereby you go to a small press, retain the rights except for the limited edition, and then become your own, basically, distributor. In my many years, it's my 48th year, in my many years I've never seen faster changes in publishing. And you have to say to yourself, we go back to that, are you trying to be rich and famous, or are you trying to write something that's important to yourself? If you're going to be rich and famous, and again, 3,000 books a week is not going to make you rich and famous. Many authors who are considered very successful, the totality of their sales, hardback, trade paperback, audio, and ebook, 50,000 copies total. Don't quit your day job. So this might be disheartening to you, but I want it to be liberating. Because how long do you want to roll the rock up the hill? Or how long do you want to finally say, you know, I'm me. I'd like to be Brad Pitt. You know, I'd like to look like Brad Pitt. It ain't going to happen. You know, you might want to be #1 on the New York Times list. They're not promoting unknowns unless it's a catchy subject. If you look at the New York Times list, it's mostly established names. So liberate yourselves and say you now have the freedom to be yourselves. You now have the freedom to write what you were meant to write, what you need to write. I can't guarantee that it's going to do, if you want to be the rich and famous route, I can't guarantee it's going to do it for you. For me, writing those Victorian books in response to the grief I felt from my granddaughter and my son, that was all the reward I wanted. And it turned out the books did very well for me, I think because they carried conviction. But mind you, that was in 2013 up to 2016, and a lot changed after 2016. The book doesn't really change, in large part because of streaming, which only started in 2013, the way we understand streaming with House of Cards on Netflix. 2009, I'm getting pretty close. 2009, I want to take questions. 2009 was the start of the e-book revolution. Imagine that, only 11 years. 2013 was the start of the streaming revolution. And here we are. So, I am going to take some questions now. I think we're right on schedule. Yes, sir?
Going back to writing what you want to write, I wanted to deal with my latest manuscript with really deep, dark family issues, my relationship with my aging mother and my sister and playing over the estate. So I'm writing from the point of view of a 27-year-old female Korean-American psychic. Neither female, 27, Korean.
You got a problem, yeah.
My issue is it's after American Dirt.
I don't know what to tell you. Those of you who know about American Dirt, female author writing about, Anglo writing about Mexican, Hispanic, let us say, immigrant, and how difficult it is to get into the United States while being chased by a drug cartel. It's on the bestseller list, lots of controversy, but some people said, wait a minute, she's not Hispanic. I don't know what to tell you about that. This is a big deal. I know many authors who are talking about this in terms of, can you write a novel in which there's a female main character? You look pretty male to me. It's become an issue, especially when, I don't have time to read it, but I bought last Sunday's New York Times list. 7 of the best-selling novels were by female writers about female main characters. And, I'm not sure, unless you're writing a certain kind of book for men, I'm not sure what the market is. And this then goes back to, we can be frustrated, or else we can. My advice to you is, if it's important to you, you write the book and then you find, and it all might change. Or you can change your name. And it's happened. I don't mean to be facetious about that. Well, that's right, you can use, now normally it's women who use the initials, but I don't know why a male couldn't either. All I'm about is, at the end of the day, there's a great line in Sam Peckinpah's movie Ride the High Country where Joel McCrea says, all I want to do is enter my house justified. And that's me. All I want to do is write a book that I wrote, it was important to me, and if it didn't find an audience, I never counted on the money. I did get it, but that's because I got lucky. Otherwise, so other question? Yes, sir.
It seems to me that ebooks have sort of overwhelmed print really quickly. That happened probably faster than anybody would have predicted. Do you see it possibly morphing into audiobooks, which would necessarily have to be written a little bit differently?
Well, you're exactly right, except that it's already happening. Ebooks plateaued. They reached a certain point and then they stopped. Now, remember, there were 800,000 self-published ebooks last year. Wow. It's too much. The competition was too much, and let's face it, self-published ebooks tend to have not a good reputation. So what happened was that it leveled off, and trade paperbacks began to be, and then audiobooks took off. And oh boy, did they take off. Because people realized in the publishing, a lot of people are in cars for 2 hours a day to get to work and back. So audiobooks are the strongest element of publishing today. And in fact, some ebook publishers, and often they're related to the big 5 or Amazon, are saying, forget the print book. If you think it'd be a good audiobook, just send us the thing. We'll see if it'd be a good audiobook. So there are all kinds of ways in which this is happening. It's such a shifting market. The other thing that's very strong is the equivalent of radio plays, where stories that are dramatized with actors, just like back in the 30s and 40s. But yes, the answer is yes. But ebooks are not selling the way, I'm not saying it's flops, but it isn't this way anymore. It's like this. Another question? Yes.
Can you restate what the things you need to write?
Yeah, you have to have a theme that's important to you, something that's personally driving you. Otherwise, why write the book? The second is there has to be something about the way the book that is written that is interesting to you, that you're not just writing another knockoff of the way some other book was written. So there's something fresh and different about it. Not always dramatically different, but just something. Every theme requires its own form. A book, and that, when I wrote Murder is a Fine Art and the other Victorian books, I said, well, wait a minute, these books are set in 1854. It might be fun to write these books as if they could have been published in 1854, so that there would be nothing in it that was incompatible with publishing at that time. So that then led me to read a whole bunch of novels that were published in the 1850s in order to try to, so it was fun. Writing a book can be fun. You say, this is kind of clever. It's like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is, my big thing. How inventive that is. How different and unusual. I've never seen a movie like it. And that's sort of like my goal, except you don't want to go crazy, have that psychologist on the plane with me say, and the third thing is that there's something about the research. I mean, people say write what you know about. I say write what you want to know about. Get excited. When I was doing my Western, I'm still doing, I've rewritten it 3 times. It's probably going to be my doom. But believe me, I know so much about Westerns that I could do a course in them. If you're writing a mystery, you should be an expert in the history of mysteries. If you're writing a thriller, you should be an expert in the history of thrillers. Ditto all the way along. If you're curious about thrillers, I co-edited a book called Thrillers 100 Must Reads, which have this, have the kind of history that you're talking about. Does that help? Does that summarize?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, what was the third one?
Oh, and the research.
Research? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
The theme, the way the book is written, and the research. Yes, sir.
You mentioned instead of TV, you like to read. About what's the number of books that you get through? What's your rate?
Since the 1st of January, I've read 15 books. Now you have to realize, and you are in this position, you spend, I dare say many of you have day jobs. So, you're putting the writing into, so you don't have a lot of time to read, except your own stuff. In my case, I spend 8 hours a day writing. And some days I don't feel like it, and too damn bad. I spend the time, and then when I'm done, do I want to now read? No. So the schedule my wife and I have is I tend to finish maybe 4:30. And we talk and do stuff, the 2 of us, and then what we do is we watch a movie while we eat. And then we're usually done by 7:30, so we clean up. It's rare that I'm not in bed reading by 8 or 8:30. And so I've just been tearing through the books, and I'd have to look, there might be more than 15. I just finished reading Peyton Place. Oh. I'm reading small town exposés. King's Row. Oh, God. I'm in heaven. And I got so interested, I'm now writing a short story about small town expose. So much fun. If you're not having fun, way in the back, yes sir.
Yes, sir. Out of curiosity, have you received some sort of commission from subsequent Rambo movies?
Yes, my contract, which is from 1972 with Columbia Pictures, gave me 5% of the profits. And I have received profits every year since 1983. That's not normal. In the show business and the movie business, profits are like the horizon, they recede infinitely. But I really like the first 3, for the first 3 movies, First Blood, Rambo 2 and 3, Andy Vanya and Mario Kassar were the execs on that, and I got along with them splendidly. And I remember one day, and I saw them a lot, I remember reading, Andy said to me, David, we made so much money, we can't hide it. Now, am I making a ton of money now? No. But I get a check every year. So.
Did you help with the scripts on that?
No. But if you have a major movie star who is also a writer associated with and I love Sylvester Stallone, this is not a knock, this is the business. If you have a major movie star who is a writer, you are not going to be writing that movie. Now, I'm a vested member of the Writers Guild. I've been a member since 1980. I've written a lot of stuff for movies. I could do it. In fact, I was asked to write a 3rd Rambo movie, which would take place in South America, but they decided instead to switch and do it in Afghanistan. And so I in the day with Andy and Mario, I was consulted all the time. We were on the same page. The studio that makes the current movies, I don't have a relationship with. So whatever happens with them, I don't know. Does that answer your question? Yeah. You surprised at my candor?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for what you're sharing. We are at an extraordinary time in history right now.
No kidding.
And with climate change in particular. And my question is to you, what is the writer's responsibility at this juncture in history?
Well, of course, that's a personal choice. We have some writers will say, I've got to tell people the truth. How many people are going to read it? I just don't know. My own instinct has been to sublimate. I have all kinds of, if you read my Victorian novels where 400 families had the wealth to control the United Kingdom, once you know what I had in mind and you read those novels, you know it's the 1% that I'm writing about. And those novels are exceedingly, what would be the word, read a certain way, anarchic. But I did it my own way. And so I believe in trying to convert as many people as possible in ways they don't know they're being converted. I mean, why be blamed? Yes, back there.
So you're writing 8 hours a day. Is it focused on one book, or do you have different projects, or how does that day go?
It varies. Lately, the Western, which is a meta-Western, which is a Western about Westerns, so that when people are done, they'll understand the genre. This is fancy stuff, and sometimes I just get worn down by how to do it so it's done acceptably and not so fancy people will say, what the heck are you doing? So what I've been doing lately, because I said I've become fascinated by King's Row and Peyton Place. Stephen King's, I call him Steve because we were close for a while. Stephen King's Salem's Lot was deliberately a cross between Peyton Place and Dracula. I mean, that was his note. Right, when he set out to write that, that was the intention. So then, once you know what you're writing about, to go back to first principles, you know what your choices must be in order to accomplish that goal. And, to go back to, if you don't know what you're trying to accomplish, you're not going to have a whole lot of success in what you're writing. So what I've been doing is writing a page of this other project about small town novels, and then switching to the Western. Because once I'm involved that far, it's very difficult to get distance. So a little advice for all of you, this has worked for me. I print out my writing at the end of every day. And what I read in the morning, I read printed. And I make my notes printed. So that what we have is analog, we have digital, analog, digital, analog. So I'm tricking myself. And I do not read where I write. I have a writing desk, and then I find other places to do my reading, and it gets different. And then at the end of each draft, I change the font. So I go from Times New Roman, which is the preferred font, but I switch over to Courier just to mess with my head. And then I'll switch back in the next draft back to Times New Roman. And between reading digitally, between reading analog, between reading in different places and changing the font, I'm able to, mess my head up so that I'm somebody else as I'm reading as opposed to writing. And then what I do also is on the printed stuff, I'll print out, I'll just put a page out at random, and I'll look at it without thinking about what came back before or after, and I'll just run my eye down, and I might say, oh my God, I got 2 paragraphs in a row that begin by what? Can't have that, how did I miss that? Or similar things, I'll just look at a little dialogue, I said, I showed my wife's a great reader. I said, hey, what do you think of this first chapter? What do we have? And she said, after she read it, she said, well, what we have here is confusion. So clarity, whatever we do in order to make it makes sense. Clarity is our are we done?
We have one more back there in the
Okay.
corner, and I think we need to cut it down there.
I have a question. Do you manually type your work, or do you voice, record it?
Do I record it? No, I'm old school. I tell you how many typewriters I went through. I mean, I'm so old, I use the typewriter. And if you look at my hands, the fingers are misshapen. The bones have gone crazy because of the damage. So you want me done, right?
Kathy has back there, but
Oh, okay, yeah. I have books I will sign, and I need $10. Okay? No, as Harlan Ellison once said, the great Harlan Ellison, get paid. Now, I think I graciously don't take, there's a fee that you get for this. Hell with it, you guys keep the fee. But I want my $10 for my books. So, and I'll sign them, and you get a picture of me and Sylvester Stallone with it, so that's an extra credit. So maybe, are we done?
we have 2 questions in the back.
Okay, way in the back.
Way in the back.
So somebody
On the
tell me
left.
which,
Way back.
oh,
Way up
you.
there.
I thought you were telling me that you had my books. All right, what's the question?
I have a fan question.
Yeah.
I've held on to for a very long time. And it's because my grandfather's name was John Rambo.
Yes.
And I've always wanted to know where you came up with the name.
My wife, dear blessed wife, we've been married 55, 56 years. I'm an old guy. We were at Penn State, and I was writing First Blood, and I knew I needed a character with a force, a name with force, and I didn't have it. So I'd be typing along, blank, 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 runs up a hill, blank, blank, blank. So I had all these blank spaces in the manuscript. So my wife and I, how old would Sarah have been? 2 years old. We had no money. Oh, it was terrible. And we went, I mean, you know, it's fun, right? To say, how poor were you? I can beat that. So she had a quarter. So she bought some apples. Best quarter we ever spent. So she bought the apples and she came home and she said, now I remember vividly, it was Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock. And we had a bedroom where Sarah and we slept, and we also had my desk for my little typewriter. And I'm typing away the genius at work. And Donna said, I bought some apples, they're pretty good, you want to taste one? And I said, no, whatever you say. Really, she said, I think you should taste these apples. These are pretty good apples. Now think about the method. Taste the apple. The world is hovering. The change could, what's going to happen? And good husband that I am, I said, oh, okay, I'll taste the darn apple. And then you can leave the genius at work. So I bit into the apple. Isn't this great? And what do? Tastes pretty good. What do you say? What's it called? A Rambo apple. What? A Rambo apple. Spell it. R-A-M-B-O. All right, now you all haven't ever heard of Rambo apples. They're very popular in central Pennsylvania. Penn State, if you go into the Nittany Lion Inn, they have a bowl of Rambo apples there. When Johnny Appleseed, John Chapman, went through Pennsylvania, Indiana, and Ohio planting apple trees, they were Rambo apple trees. Did I know this? I did not. But I know the name. One of the differences, you know, I love this homily. It's a he-she thing. He. What's that guy got that I don't got? She. Awareness. He. Awareness. What's that? That's your obligation. You cannot let anything go past you. There I am watching that movie. You know, they say, Thomas de Quincey says we can have thoughts and emotions we don't know we have. My life changed. My wife says, bite into the apple. I did, my life changed. And you have to be aware of the fact that this can happen at any time and that inspiration can strike in the weirdest ways. And if you're professional, you seize on it. I cannot guarantee you're going to be successful. I just want you to be happy. And I think if you follow me, my line of reasoning, you write what you were meant to write, at least you'll have a book you're proud of. So, shall we quit on that, or was there one more question? I think we